Whether he was trying to break the child's neck with a severe movement that followed, or whether he was just aiming her where he wanted her to fall, Lark did not know. Lark's throbbing with a terrible inner pressure. Her eyes felt about to burst from her skull. The room, the air, the world had turned a blurred and misty crimson. She made a guttural hitching noise. No, 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 it sounded, and watched, paralyzed with fear, as Reverend Burton flung Robin against the hearth, followed her, and picked up an iron frying pan from one of the fireplace trivets. Robin was up on her knees, sobbing quietly, when he hit her on the head. Her sobbing ceased as she fell, her chin striking the floor. Her hair was in her face. Miraculously, she began to sit up again. The Reverend stared at her with true amazement, his brows slightly lifted and his teeth parted, as if witnessing a resurrection. He hit her again with a pan, the sound like the strange commingling of a low-throated church bell and a clay pitcher breaking in two. She fell forward into the fireplace, her face disappearing into the white ashes. Then Reverend Burton let the frying pan drop, and in her state of near madness, her mind slipping back and forth between horrors, Lark saw hot embers touch fire to her little sister's hair and crisp the locks to powder and smoke. There was a silence, which went on hideously until the breath rushed again into Faith Lindsay's lungs and she began to scream, her mouth wide open. The tears that shot from her eyes were ruddy with the blood of ruptured tissues. Reverend Burton stood looking at the dead girl. He pulled in a long draught of air and shook his head back and forth as if to clear his own mind and vision. Or perhaps Lark thought he had sprained his neck, killing her sister. She tried to speak, to shout or scream or curse, but found her voice had left her, and all that emerged was a hoarse rattling of enraged air. "Hush," he said to Faith, and louder when she did not. "Hush." When she did not or could not, Reverend Burton returned to the table, took up a handful of cornbread, and pressed it into her mouth until she gagged and choked. Her bright blue eyes, wide to the point of explosion, stared at him without blinking as her chest slowly rose and fell. "There. Better," he said, his head swiveled. His gaze found Lark, whose voice was reborn in a shuddering moan. With both hands she gripped hold of the chair beside her, as if his oak legs made up the walls of a mighty fortress. He rubbed his forehead with the heel of his right hand. "Don't think ill of me," he said. And then he went to Aaron's body and, pressing down with a boot against the chest, pulled the knife out. He wiped it on one of the good napkins. Then he righted his chair, sat down at his place at the head of the table, sliced himself a piece of ham, spooned out a baked apple and a helping of beans, and began to eat. Faith was silent, still staring but now simply at the far wall. Lark still gripped hold of the chair, her knuckles white. She did not move. She was thinking crazily that if she didn't move, he wouldn't see her, and soon he would forget that she was even there. He chewed down the ham and licked his fingers. "Have you ever been irritated by a fly?" he asked as he carved the baked apple. His voice made Lark jump. She thought she had spoiled her invisibility, and she thought she was stupid and weak, and she couldn't help but begin to cry, though silently. "One of those big green flies that buzz around and around your head until you can't stand for it to live another minute. Another second," he amended, between bites. "So you think I'm going to kill this fly?" "Yes, I am. And if it doesn't go easily, I shall pull off its wings before I crush it, because I don't like to be flouted." Then you watch the fly, and it may be slow or fast, or very fast indeed, but soon you make out its pattern. Everything alive has a pattern. You see its pattern, you think one step, one little fly's buzz ahead of its pattern, and there you have it. He emphasized his point by rapping his spoon against the table. A dead fly. Not so different with people. He reached for the cornbread, paused to take note of Lark's crying, and then continued his solitary feast. "I hate flies. They'll be here in a while. Nothing you can do to keep them out. You're not," Lark didn't know she meant to speak, but there it was. Still, the words were sluggish and her throat strangled. You're not really a reverend, no," he admitted with a small shrug. "But if I come to your door and said, 'Good morning, I'm a killer,' where would it have gotten me?" You didn't have, could she ever make a whole sentence again? Something in her mind was screaming, but she could barely whisper. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to, Lark. That's a pretty name. There used to be a nest of larks in a tree outside my house when I was a boy. Did you kill them? Absolutely not. They woke me up in the morning so I could get to work. And now came the question that she had to ask, but that she dreaded. Are you going to kill us now? He finished the apple before he spoke again. Lark, let me tell you about power. Most men will say that power is the ability to do as you please. But I say, power is the ability to do as you please, and no one is able to stop you. Oh! He watched as Faith threw up her breakfast and in so doing blew the cornbread out of her mouth. I think she's coming around. Faith was trying to stand. Her face was pallid and somehow misshapen, her mouth twisted to one side, her eyes sunken inward as if a pair of vicious thumbs had forced them back into the skull. The tracks of tears glistened on her cheeks. Her mouth moved, but she made no sound. Then Lark thought her mother's tortured eyes must have seen the bodies again, and the whole event must have whirled once more through her mind like the gun smoke that still roiled at the ceiling. Faith slid back to the floor and began to cry like a broken-hearted child. The not reverend continued to eat. He cut another piece of ham and whittled it down between his teeth. We didn't do, Lark feared she too was going to vomit, for the smell of blood and burnt hair had touched her nostrils. We didn't do anything to you. And that matters exactly how? He asked with a spoonful of beans in his mouth. When no reply was made, he ate them and dug in for another bite. Lark wiped her eyes. She was trembling, the tears still running down her face. She was afraid to try to stand up, for she was sure that would bring him upon her with either the knife or some other implement. She listened to her mother crying and thought that something in the sound reminded her of how Robin had wept when the spotted puppy, Dottie, they named it, had died of worms last summer. Lark felt her lips curl. She felt the rage seize her heart and embolden her soul. And even though she knew that what she was about to say would mean her death, she spoke it anyway. God will fix you. He finished the piece of ham he was working on, took a last drink of the cider, and then he put his elbows on the table and laced his murderous hands together. Really? Well, I'd like to see that. I want you to listen. Listen beyond your mother's crying. What do you hear? Listen now. Listen very carefully. Go on. What do you hear? Lark didn't answer. Nothing but my voice, he said. No one but me. He lifted his arms toward the smoky ceiling. Where is the bolt of lightning? Where is the angel with the flaming sword? Bring them on. I'm waiting. He paused a moment, smiling thinly, and then he lowered his arms. No, Lark. It won't be today. He regarded the nails of his right hand and with him scratched his chin. You'll stand up now and take off your clothes. Lark didn't move. Deep inside her head, the words repeated over and over again. He picked up the knife. It reflected a streak of light across his face and across the walls. Let me ask you this then. Which ear could your mother do without? When no sound came from between the girl's tightly compressed lips, he continued. Actually, she could do without either one. All you need is a hole. But fingers, now that's another kettle of cod. He waited. She waited also, her face downcast. I'll demonstrate, he said. And with the knife gripped in his hand, he stood up. Lark said, wait, please. But she knew he would not wait. No man who had just slaughtered 3 people was going to wait. And so she got unsteadily to her feet. And when she began to remove her clothing, she tried to find a place in her mind to hide. A small place, just enough to squeeze into. Show me where you sleep. He was standing right beside her, the knife glinting. One ragged fingernail played across her freckled shoulders, down her throat and between her breasts.